Welcome to Panelism, the podcast where we talk about comics, graphic novels worth having on your shelf. And today, we've got more. It's one of those shows that we're just going to jump into. It's like a classic show. I'm Taylor Trask. I should probably introduce myself, by the way.
Oh, and I'm Todd.
and Todd is here, too. Yes, this is going to be more like a classic Todd and Taylor show episode. If you go back into our archive, which many of you do, I'm always surprised to see how many people listen to some of our very old episodes for the first time in our stats. It's crazy. But like those early episodes we put those out under a banner called the Todd and Taylor Show. That's what this whole thing was originally called. And we literally started it because Todd and I kept having these protracted conversations where we just get into the weeds on a lot of geeky things. And one of us, I forget who, was just like, let's just record these. And
I feel like that all credit for that goes to you.
Well, maybe, but
I think it's a great idea.
But we started, what was the first one? It was right after, was it Age of Ultron?
It was Ultron, yeah.
Yeah, wow, that seems like ancient history now, especially in the MCU. Like that almost seems like that predates Iron Man 1 in my timeline.
It almost seems that way, I agree.
For a variety of reasons.
I've revisited Iron Man 1 so much more than Age of Ultron. I'm sure you have too.
I absolutely have. But I mean, it's not that Ultron was necessarily a bad movie, but it doesn't have. Do you think it is?
Well, I think that our show is so notable to me because it's one of those hilarious things of like I famously declared like I like this better than the first Avengers movie.
That's right.
And then did not watch it for another like 6 years, and during that time saw the original Avengers over and over. So like proving myself wrong. And have since gone back to it, and I'm like, what the hell was I thinking? So I don't think maybe it's not bad, but it is not.
It's not good. It's not great.
Which is
yeah. I mean, if you compare it to other movies of the Marvel caliber, it's definitely in the bottom tier in my opinion, because for a variety of reasons. Number one, you can't unsee James Spader walking around as Ultron, like with his James Spaderisms and all of that, like that. And Frank, we're probably just going to rehash what episode 1 of the Todd and Taylor Show was, so I don't want to do that. By the way, if you want to know what our thoughts are at the time on Age of Ultron, go back to episode 1 or 2.
I think it's called like 0. Yeah, or
episode
05 or something.
Yeah, we talked a lot about Ultron.
Yeah. But I agree. We're going to do that same thing today, like something pop culture related we couldn't ignore.
That's right.
We had thoughts.
And just so you saw it in the title, but just in case you didn't see the title, we will be talking about the Snyder Cut of Justice League. That all coming up right after this. But I think you had pitched me an idea beforehand to just kind of get a potluck going of shows and things that we are watching lately to kind of warm us up for Snyder Cut. And you had mentioned one that I'd heard of but I hadn't seen. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. Like I've been watching The Luminaries. It is on Stars, which is an app I previously only knew as the thing I subscribed to for a month to get disappointed in American Gods with. And
was it disappointing?
Also, shocking news, they're on season 3 of that. Or there are 3 seasons out or something. I don't know what's going on. But yeah, Luminaries is it's a mystery. And I think the trailer does a great job of setting the mood for it, but it's definitely one of those things of where I didn't feel like the trailer, I had a misapprehension of what the show would be about from the trailer, and I'm just really into it. And I like the way they're doling out clues and then resolving them. Like it's just a great exercise in like that thing we talked about with Game of Thrones, where sometimes there'd be this huge cliffhanger that never gets resolved, and sometimes there'd be a cliffhanger which would take 13 episodes to get resolved. There never was like a cliffhanger that got resolved within the episode, but Luminaries is doing a good job of like, sometimes, you see a clue and then it like gets resolved a few scenes later and you're like, oh, cool. So I am connecting things correctly. You don't feel like they're manipulating you. It's like you feel like I could put this whole thing together if I just had enough time. So
isn't that nice to kind of be reminded like what shows used to be like when they asked and answered questions in the same episode for once? Right. You're like, oh, that used to be the thing. That used to be the standard thing, and then Lost screwed it up for everybody.
This does have a Lost feel to it. I will say that. Although it takes place in 1865 in New Zealand, which is really cool. Just, it's like gives it a setting that's like foreign to us Americans, but familiar enough, but it does have this lost feel to it. And I don't know. And it's because it's a timeline jumper.
Oh, I was going to ask, is there some kind of sci-fi element? Because I'm looking at the pictures and it looks like something really cool that might have magic or something. But then I'm looking at the Wikipedia entry and it just seems like a historical drama of some kind. So it's...
Yeah. And it's the way the story's being told and the way you're piecing it together has to do with these timeline and location jumps. So sometimes it'll do that and you'll see the same character dressed radically different. And for me, that just gave me this like lost feel, or the like jump and you'll see a character you didn't know was in that location. And you're like, what's happening now? But I was not the biggest Lost fan. I only saw a couple seasons, so I can't really speak to that. But anyway.
Now, you mentioned New Zealand. I have to just out of the gate ask, is Murray from Flight in the Conchords, does he appear anywhere in this? Rhys Darby, is he in this show at some point?
He has not appeared yet, but I believe contractually as Rhys Darby, he, as ambassador for New Zealand to the world, he's probably obligated to appear at some point.
I would imagine he's got at least to pop up, even like as a hotel clerk or something, just like... Or, just something where somebody has to interface with him for some crucial reason. It's like, hello, mates.
Right.
There he is.
And people may not know this, but Rhys Darby is a sound effect comedian. He is.
Wait, is he? Is he really?
New Zealand's answer to Michael Winslow. Yeah.
Wait, are you serious? I did not know this.
Yeah, I've seen him live. Yeah, I saw him at the Improv.
But I thought he just did stand up. But he does like sound effects with his vocal ability. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting too, because I only know him from Flight of the Conchords and then later things like What We Do in the Shadows. But then my other favorite thing he's voice acting for the excellent, by the way, Netflix Voltron reboot that they did. He's one of the main characters in that. And he's one of those actors where there's no way he can disguise what he truly is. Like,
right.
He can't, he's not a character actor in that way where, he's never going to Gary Oldman himself into a part that you're like, wait, that's Rhys Darby. Never going to happen. And I think in that there's some comfort. Like when you hear his voice, you're like, it's one of those sorts of shows where it's just,
I'll tell you though, I thought that same thing about Steve Coogan, and damn it, if that guy isn't versatile. So let's not count Rhys Darby out yet. If he gets the right role, he might be pretty meaty in it.
All right, I will reserve that for the time when that comes. So you found, how did you find Luminaries? Like what? I guess we've talked about things that you haven't watched offline, and then I'm just curious with all the stuff that you have to have on your list. What caused you to go, you know what? I'm going to watch this right now.
There was an outside influence on it, but yeah,
okay.
But I did watch the trailer and think, okay, this is, this looks like a thing I can kind of sink into and enjoy. We've definitely talked about it because we've mentioned WandaVision and things like that, where there's some of these where I feel like some of these new shows, especially the Marvel shows or Mandalorian, where I feel like I've got to bring some kind of investment to it. And Luminaries felt like I don't have any outside investment in this. I'm not a fan of this property or anything. So it was easy to just kind of soak it in rather than feel like it's homework,
Yeah, I was just going to say it was probably more entertainment and less homework.
Right, right.
I worry that's where we are with a lot of these things where I'm glad I watched WandaVision. I'm glad I'm watching Falcon and Winter Soldier, but there's other things. We'll get to this in a minute or two, but Snyder Cut kind of felt a little like that, where I'm like, well, I got to watch it, I guess.
Interesting.
Just because it's like, if I don't, I will miss out on conversations and things. And I wanted to as well, but there was a little bit of an effort behind having to go, okay, this is the time I'm going to do it. Here we go. Let's
we'll definitely talk about that. But first, I want to touch on what you've been watching.
Yeah. Well, okay. So while you were watching Luminaries, I not discovered, because I'd sort of been henpecking at it for the last year, I think. Maybe not even that. Like since last September, I've been henpecking at a show called The Magicians, which concluded. It was a sci-fi series, sci-fi series that concluded April of last year for good. Season 5 was their last, and has been on Netflix just as long. And then finally season 5 appeared on Netflix too. So I had been kind of henpecking at it. Lev Grossman wrote a series of novels called The Magicians, on which the show is based. And then they have done an excellent run of comics that are sort of prequel sequels to the show and books. And that's where I sort of fell into this. They had a sequel comic series that came out right around the time the show was ending last year. And I just picked them. They had really cool covers, the really interesting sort of themes. I picked them up, really loved that. And I was like, wait, is this part of a bigger thing? I read Alice's Story, which is a graphic novel by the same people. That's kind of a prequel, also sort of a point of view story that complements the books themselves. And then was like, okay, well now I love all this. Let me try the show again. Because I'd kind of pecked at it before a little bit. Didn't really get into it at the time. I had sort of started in season 1, and then I ended up like kind of picking an episode out of season 2 or 3 just to see like where it's headed.
Right.
And was kind of like, well, it seems interesting. But then once I had that comics context, and having gone through those, went back to the series and actually started. Truthfully, I started it at the end of season 1. I'm just like, okay, let's see where this goes. And then kind of carried it through. And then I read online a lot of people going, once you get past halfway on season 2, from there to the end, it really starts to flow. And that's correct. So if you really want to get into it, I would say maybe start at season 2, go back and pick up season 1, because you can. They do a lot of. So real quick, the whole thing is like, what would happen if the kids from Harry Potter went to college? Basically, is the premise. So you get these college age kids who go to a magical university called Breakbills in America. It's an American thing. And then imagine also in that same universe that their version of Narnia, which they called Fillory, is real, and they can travel to and from. And so you have this group of various 20-somethings experimenting with magic. Oh, and the other twist: imagine if Hermione Granger was rejected. So like the most talented one of all was told, you can't come to school here, you're not good enough. What does she go off and do? And so like there's all these crazy little storylines, and the first season spends way too much time with them at college. As the seasons go on, they sort of break away from that, and they just kind of go off and have other adventures that aren't so tied into the school thing. But the school is still there. It's just not sort of this omnipresent location, which actually works better when they do that. But I fell in love with the show. I really started watching it, like I said, kind of through season 2, and then you realize this is one of the best ensemble casts since Battlestar Galactica. Like it has that it's a bunch of either no names or actors with very, very few credits before this show. And they're all, with the exception of one person, they're all really, really good, and they grow so much as actors and as characters as the thing goes on. So you really start to kind of fall in love with this cast. The only character that I don't think works as well is the actress who plays Alice, and Alice is sort of one of the main characters, and she has a really cool sort of version of her that lives in the comics that I liked, and the one that's on the TV show is just not. It's really off-putting. It's not at all what she's whiny. The actress who plays her has this just crazy one-note delivery on every single thing she does, and it's just she makes her less cool than she should be. And so you kind of have to get past that. But they introduce other characters that are just really cool. My favorite is a guy named, I just forgot his name, Hale Appleman. And he plays this character called Elliot, who, by all means, I mean, I'm going on the record now. If that guy isn't cast as Reed Richards, something is wrong with the universe. Like, he is the perfect guy to play Reed Richards. And he does some crazy, interesting things. And spoilers, in season 4, he actually gets possessed by a really dark force, and the way he plays possessed is something I have never ever seen before, like in any actor who's been possessed. He kind of has this like Andy Kaufman kind of thing that he does, which is just really, it's really intriguing. So that guy is going to end up being in really cool stuff, hopefully going forward. But the whole show is just delightful. Like it has really cool, it's a budget cable show, so there's clearly some things that are kind of funny in terms of like there would have been a battle scene here, but they had to cut it for budget, or there would have been a bigger thing here, but it had to be cut for budget, which in is kind of good, because then it makes the writing a bit stronger, makes the character moments have to be stronger, because when you can't have crazy locations and crazy effects, which it has those things too. It just compared to some of these really expensive Disney shows, You're not going to get that all the way through, but at the same time, then you get to like
Right.
have really quiet character moments a lot more often, which I'm kind of craving anyway. So really fun.
Well,
My other favorite character is this chick named Margot, who's basically the female version of Rick Sanchez. Like, she says some of the most hilarious things ever, and she's basically a female chauvinist. So instead of saying don't be a pussy, she says don't be a nutsack. And then when somebody's like, wait, don't you mean pussy? She's like, pussies are tough, nutsacks are what they are. So it's just like she's got this really, and she's best friends with Elliot. So like those two are my favorite characters. But I don't know. You were gonna say something.
Okay. No, I was going to ask how many seasons are there altogether?
5.
And is it still being made?
No, it was a victim of that same Sci-Fi Channel thing where they canceled the series too early. So you're going to get to season 5 and love it, and then all of a sudden the finale is going to hit, and it's like, am I witnessing an entire 6th season occur in the course of like 50 minutes? Because it's just like, it's just relentless. And you can tell that they're like, oh shoot, we found out we're being canceled, they're not renewed. So we better do something to sort of tie this up in as clean a bow as we can. And given that sort of condition, they did the best with it that they could do, and you're sort of happy with where everyone ends up. But it's just, you wish Netflix had picked it up 2 years before that, because it would have been one of Netflix's bigger series. The other thing I love about it, by the way, and the other thing that really hooked me, is that there's a lot of gods portrayed in this show, and the way they do them. I mean, I wish the producers of this had made American Gods, because it's like the way it looks, the way it feels. Some of the cast, even, I'm like, I could completely imagine as some of the characters from American Gods. I'm like, this should have been that. Like, this could have been that show. And it would have been just, I mean, it's what I had hoped Starz would have done with American Gods, but they decided to not do that. So anyway, go pick it up on Netflix. They're all there. I'm actually going back now slowly through season 1 now that I know where it goes. The reason you don't really have to start, by the way, with season 1 is they do a lot of timeline jumping. And so you get to see a lot of, they visit season 1 a lot and like revisit certain scenes and things. So you kind of get that anyway. And then you can go back and go, oh, this is the original version of this scene. Almost like a DVD extra or something. But
Interesting.
I love it. It also, by the way, it also has one of the best villain characters, I think, of any TV show. This guy named Martin Chatwin, who is sort of the big bad of season 1. He's one of the kids, by the way, like in their fake version of Narnia. He's one of the 4 kids that goes to Fillory. And so imagine like Edmund, from the Chronicles of Narnia. Imagine he goes to Fillory and turns evil. And like you have this guy, and he's a delight. Charles Measures, the actor who plays him, and he sings, and he's just this crazy, flippant, chaotic, evil, but with a smile on his face character that's just wonderful. Anyway.
Cool. And it also sounds like just what we're talking about, like it's a show that maybe you're not bringing any prior investment in the, in the story too. Like it's a thing you get to visit fresh, because even though you were pulled in by the comics and stuff, it's not one of those properties, because obviously we're about to discuss one where, we've been living with Batman and Superman all of our lives.
And no, this isn't this. If anything, like this sets up like, I almost wish now they'd make like a comic series that's like the stories we didn't see from these characters, like the way they're depicted in the show. Because you see the befores and the afters in the comics, and then the books themselves are like seasons 1 and part of 2. And then the show kind of veers very off into its own direction, which I think is just fine. But no, it's great. It's like it's kind of like it's getting to fall in love with a whole new cast of characters and storylines, and it's a bit of a soap opera, so it's got that vibe too.
Yeah,
but
right.
I think in a good way. Like I'll give you one more sort of reason to watch. One of the main characters ends up dying at some point in one of the seasons, and when it happens, you're like, oh my god, and then that character never comes back. And it's not like that, and like not like there's not like a cameo later on. It's just like they're dead and they died, and that's it.
Man.
And then they have a on-screen
were they played by
sort of
Sean Bean?
It could have been. It easily could have been. No, it's later on, so it's not season 1. It's later on. It happens. By the way, Sean Bean is on Snowpiercer. Everybody should be doing a death watch for that guy, because at some point It's going to happen.
It's coming.
But then they have this, when that character dies, they have this on-screen memorial service for him. That's just one of the most beautifully acted scenes I've ever seen on any TV show. So there is some amazing acting going on from some folks who, this is basically their big break. And they're, for the most part, they're doing an amazing job with it. There's a couple Battlestar Galactica alums and things. Oh, another cameo. April O'Neil from the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie, the good one from 1990.
Okay.
Judith Hogue is in this. And so when she pops, I'm like, oh my God, it's April O'Neil. She plays one of the kids' moms, which is bizarre because she's in her early 50s. So it's strange to see her play a 25-year-old mom, but whatever. Anyway, I like that. I'm also watching Falcon and Winter Soldier, which very different from WandaVision, but it feels more like an actual Marvel movie, just divided up into parts. Whereas WandaVision decisively felt more like a TV show.
Right. And played more with genre and stuff like that. And you had texted that to me about Falcon and Winter Soldier, which I'm not watching. And I thought it ties in really well with Justice League for that reason, because of Justice League being broken up into chapters, Well,
let's dive in, and I will reference Falcon and Winter Soldier as we go, because I think there's some points some point counterpoints things. Well, excellent. But let's start with that because, and by the way, at this point it's kind of silly to say this, but there will be every spoiler probably imaginable for Justice League. So if for some reason you haven't seen it at all, or you think the Snyder Cut's not that much different in terms of the story, but we're going to spoil it all. Yeah, so just keep that in mind.
Yeah, Superman dies. Spoiler.
Superman dies.
That was in the last movie. Sorry.
Yeah, exactly. No, but it's I was almost distracted by the chapter breaks in Justice League because they didn't really make any sense. It's not like it's not like the movie was designed that way, right? What had happened, I don't know if you know this, what had happened was HBO wanted to release it episodically over 4 weeks, but they would have had to redo all the contracts and pay everybody double scale, double their wage and everything to do that. And so they're like, fine. So what you're seeing is what would have been those would have been the episodes had they done it, but they kept it anyway. But even that said, I looked at it and I was like, every time I would stop and do an episode title, I'm like, what makes this break significant? They just didn't seem like the breaks, with the exception of maybe one, I just didn't see their place. It was almost distracting.
I actually liked them. And it did feel a little bolted on to me for sure. Because there were a lot of places where there was I would describe it as an extreme cut between scenes where it would take me a minute to realize we're in a different location and this is a Steppenwolf scene or something like that, But I wish I had an example right off the top of my head. So I did think the breaks were good in that respect of it sort of let us clear the table and reset it a little bit.
All right.
But yeah, I agree. It did feel kind of bolted on, but I can't say it made it more enjoyable. I do think what would have actually made it a little bit more enjoyable to me is if I don't want to see it over 4 weeks. That would have driven me crazy.
Oh yeah.
But if it had been separate files to watch on HBO Max, separate shows, in a
where there's
series,
credits at the end of each one, and it's and then you have
right, yeah, and then you have that option of yes, I want to continue, because that maybe would have made it easier for me to feel you know what, I can get up and come back to this. Whereas there were definitely times where in the middle there where I was oh my God, there's 2.5 more hours.
Yeah, I had that same moment where I committed. I was when did I watch it?
Right.
Monday night. I was it's happening. I'm pushing through. Let me just pull back and let's quick broad strokes. I feel and this is my overarching point to this whole discussion. I feel the Whedon cut wasn't right. This isn't right. But between the two, there is a pretty solid Justice League movie that could be assembled. And I'm almost tempted to take both of them and make my own cut to prove the point. Because there were things that the Snyder Cut did or put back in that was really good. And then there were things that Whedon put in that Snyder took out that were also good. That I'm man, it's We can't have one.
Yeah.
One or the other. So like, and I'll get into some specifics, but like, what's your broad stroke?
Well, I disagree slightly on that, which is, I mean, I like the idea that there's a good movie in there somewhere. And there's this the story behind the Snyder Cut coming out is just fascinating anyway.
Sure.
And especially even just like this thing that you just told me about HBO intending to release this as a series. I didn't know that was the case. I'm really relieved that didn't happen. I would have been more inclined not to watch it, even though I say I would have loved it broken up into separate files. But I did want it out all at once, you know? My opinion is really that the Snyder Cut is superior in every way. I just wish that Zack Snyder could make these things 2 hours or less long. And so I
don't
think
know if
with
that's
the
physically
Snyder
possible
Cut,
for him.
exactly,
I don't think he's capable of doing it.
So I think it was it kind of hurt the project to give him a blank slate entirely. Or rather, like, I wish Snyder himself had said, you know what, some of this stuff is just not going to see the light of day. You know, because I feel like once he was given the green light with Snyder Cut and HBO Max, it feels to me, I have no information on this, but it feels to me like his idea was, I'm going to put in every single thing I had, you know?
But
and
here's
stuff
what's
let me give a quick example. One is the plane not being able to fly. Who cares? You know, like that whole idea of like Batman's been struggling with this plane. That's this like recurring thing that goes through. And I do appreciate that like Cyborg and Flash had their backstories filled in, and Cyborg definitely becomes like, you know, the key to the whole story. But I don't think he needed to fix that plane for us to know that. Also, we didn't really see him fix the plane. He just talked to it. And so for me, it's like, okay, Zach, there's, I don't know, 7 minutes or something, you know, of just all the mentions of that damn plane that you could have easily just cut. So I think there's many other instances of that where they could have kept cutting this thing down, and he just felt like, no, I get to put in all my storylines. I'm going to do it all.
Well, here's the thing to remember. They shot very little new footage for this, probably maybe 15 minutes total.
One scene, that's what I heard.
Yeah. And so everything that we saw other than that had to first be scripted, and that script had to be approved by Warner Brothers, to go shoot. So there was, literally hours of footage that was scripted that Warner Brothers said, "Yep, we'll pay for that too," and they shot it, and then it was omitted, and a lot of that is just like it was just not necessary. So Warner Brothers, it's like they approved a 4-hour movie to start with, give or take. And then it's just interesting that when he left the project, they went so hard. It's like they got scared and ran the opposite direction, and then just got really muddy. Like let me just start giving you some examples. Like I'm not going to do a scene by scene breakdown. That's going to be a waste of time. But like I'm going to give you some examples of things that I liked and that I didn't like. So one of the things that I loved, I think the biggest thing I loved in the Snyder Cut was his depiction of Steppenwolf and the entire Apocalypse Darkseid gang. Every time Darkseid appeared, he looked badass. There was always this worry of like, what would Darkseid look like in a Snyder movie? Like how much, is it just gonna be like one gray, rocky blob, or is there gonna be something to him? And the design was just exquisite. And then I agree
that like that. And to me, the thing is like, I don't really know Darkseid from the comics. I mean, I've seen pictures, but I've never read a story arc with that thing as the enemy. Well,
you read Mr. Miracle. Darkseid is just popping in. That's
that's true. Good point. I've never seen the extent of his powers, so I just. But yeah, it looked like Darkseid looked great. I agree.
Desaad, Granny Goodness, like the whole, and when they show Apocalypse, it's like, wow. And then I was a little concerned because when they had first kind of floated a design of Snyder's Steppenwolf, before Whedon came on, I was like, ugh, that looks terrible. But then here, he looked amazing. Like this version of Steppenwolf crushed the Whedon version. And it's bizarre to me that they would have changed any of that at all. And then to add on to that, the most frustrating thing about the Whedon cut, now having seen this, is the fact that he completely omitted Darkseid altogether. Yeah. And so you took this, like, just these badass designs these badass villain designs and this whole subplot and one that justifies the existence of Steppenwolf in the first place, and you replace it with like this very confusing, like, well, Steppenwolf is this character. It's like, yeah, but we all know who's behind all this. Just put that in. Like, who are you? You're just going to confuse everybody.
It doesn't make any sense in the Whedon cut. So a couple things. This is the problem with this movie is like every detail we pick at is we could take in 1,000 directions. But two quick things that came up from what you just said. One is that there's a clear difference in the colorization of the films, like the saturation. So, and I've watched a YouTube video, at least one, maybe more than that, I can't remember, on, that was like sort of showing things where the scene was either the same footage or very close footage and how the color was different.
Yeah.
My problem when I watched the Whedon theatrical cut was I still couldn't tell what the hell Steppenwolf and all the like little Mothman things were. So to me, that it just looked like a buzzing cloud of crap. And I was like, what is going on here? Even though Whedon fixed the color so much, he didn't take, I don't know if he didn't have the budget. Who knows? It's just hard. We can't do anything but blame the director at this point. But Whedon didn't like make the parademons look distinctive enough that they stood out and all that. So to me, it didn't really bother me to see the really desaturated Snyder look, because I agree with you, like Steppenwolf stood out, which was as it should have been. And then there's just a buzzing horde of parademons. Fine.
I wouldn't even say, I wouldn't call the Snyder version desaturated, though. If anything, his colors were more fine-tuned. Like, that was the biggest shock to me, was that the greens were really rich looking, and his contrast and shadow was it almost had a Christopher Nolan sort of, early Nolan, when he was working with Wally Pfizer as his DP. Like, it had that sort of vibe to it, which is like, wow, this could have, here's the thing I love about Zack Snyder is a beautiful stylist. He's got he's got an amazing visual sensibility. I just think he's a piss poor writer. Like, he can direct the shit out of, great action scenes and, a lot of other things, but like his writing, I'm like, dude, this is not like here's one of the things I hated. I don't want to see the opening of the movie where Wonder Woman's just flat out murdering people in front of like families and children. Like, it's nothing. And I'm like, dude, we just saw two Wonder Woman movies where she goes out of her way to save, save even the bad guys.
Nazis.
It's like,
yeah.
And it's like, here she's just like flat out, like violently murdering people. And I'm like, man, you don't get this character. And then on top of that, every time she appears, she's got this weird Wailing Woman soundtrack behind her instead of like any of her iconic. I mean, that first time she had her iconic guitar, but then it's always like, and it doesn't change. It's just that. And
and this is such a great example of like one of the rabbit holes we go down, because I wouldn't think, oh my God, it's so hard to get into Zack, like the whole thing, but I wouldn't necessarily criticize Snyder's writing as a whole, but there's this weird thing that he does where he plants clues. Like, there's these subtle like little things all over the Justice League movies, the trilogy that we can look at now, that relate to each other. So that's cool that he was building this world, but it makes it like me watching Justice League was me sitting there trying to decipher everything. Then like, and this is a great contrast to the Luminaries TV show. Then when there were things where like there was an actual like clue to what was happening in the scene, it was like hit you over the head obvious. Like, it was so obvious. And that to me was just frustrating. It's like, oh my God, dude, you have got to like walk this balance a little bit more. And then there's stuff like the epilogue, which of course I don't know how we'll
save that for the end.
Yeah, I don't know how we're going to wrap up our podcast in an hour. With that epilogue could be an hour talking about it. But like, that comes out of nowhere, and it's like, that's the thing, you're dying for some, I don't want an explanation that just clears up what it is, but it's like, that is something that should have been more than just hinted at through nightmare visions or something. Sure. Like, there should have been a little bit more context. But anyway, we've now fallen down these other rabbit holes. But the second thing I was going to say about it, when you were talking about the Steppenwolf design and stuff, was that Whedon, by cutting out Darkseid, I wonder if he got a direction from Warner Brothers or if he just felt this way himself, like there's not going to be another Justice League movie with this cast. Because Snyder's whole thing was, I'm setting this all up because the part 2 of this Justice League is the showdown with Darkseid, is like the anti-life equation. So we're seeing now in the Snyder Cut, like the prelude to a second part. That's obviously not going to happen. But Whedon, by just cutting Darkseid out entirely, really cuts off the idea of that sequel, like totally. So I wonder if the idea was like, hey, just stop the bleeding and like cut this off where it is. And we'll just, if we do another Justice League movie, it won't be a direct sequel. Like, and you know, was that Whedon's idea or was that the studio's idea or what the hell happened there? It's just, it's bizarre to see it now with so much Darkseid stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised if in 5 to 10 years, Whedon doesn't finance or is part of some documentary about the making of his version. Right. I'm serious, where they would like actually like clarify those exact points. Cause you know, it can't be fun for him to sit there and go, look, I was brought in to do a very specific thing. And yeah, he put some of his own vision into that and there was troubles on set and all of that. But then at the same time, it's like, they brought me in to do this. This is what I was paid to do. This is what I did. Like, and now people are coming back after the fact and saying, you did a terrible job. And so it's like, I'm sure he's going to want to set the record straight. Here's the reason though, I say Zack Snyder is not a great writer. He spent more time writing the look and the layout of scenes and like writing these vignettes and not writing characters. Like, I could not tell you what Aquaman wants in this movie. I could not tell you what the Flash wants in this movie that's related to the main plot. Like, the only person I can figure out wants anything is Batman wants to put together a team to solve a unknowable problem. And like, yeah, then they come together. But like prior to that, it's like, what are all these characters doing? They're just sort of milling around. And then even once Aquaman's recruited, he's like, it's like, what does he want? Like, I don't know. There was no focus on that.
I take a little issue with that because to me, that's the problem with the Whedon cut, is that in the Whedon movie, the story, like, it's like Whedon saw the story is like, this is the Avengers version. This is like how you put the team together. Snyder saw it as like, this is the continuation of Batman versus Superman, where the threat to Atlantis and the threat to Themyscira have to be the motivating forces for Wonder Woman and Aquaman. So to me, in the Snyder Cut, I saw that. Whereas in the Whedon Cut, it was like, you know, Batman just hounding people until they joined his team.
Which is true.
But I mean, your point to Zack Snyder's like, I think you're exactly right. Like he's mapping out like these beautiful visual scenes. This is the entire problem with Sucker Punch. You know, it's like Sucker Punch stylistically looks amazing. And there's like a interesting story in there, which is basically Inception. And it did come out before Inception, but it's there's something in the writing that's like kind of ham-fisted or something. And again, I think it's like when he wants to make like a subtle point, it's so subtle that you have to like decode all this stuff. And when he wants to just drop like a normal beat, it's so obvious that you're like, oh my God, dude.
Here's another example. Here's another example of where his writing got in his way. We witnessed an entire, I feel it's like 8 to 10 minute long scene of the Flash applying for a job and then saving Iris, who is never named and never mentioned again, he never sees her again. And yet we have to listen to we watch this entire scene unfold that's basically the climax to Zack Snyder's Flash movie that never gets made. And it's like, you know, this long, and then we never come back to it. It's never mentioned again. I'm like, then what was the point of all that? He could have saved, and you could argue, well, he was saving his futures. You know, that was the first time they met. I'm like, but this isn't the Flash's movie. Like, if you're going to do that in this movie, like Zack Snyder's, like so much of this movie assumes other things that would potentially never be made, even in a perfect universe. Like, even if all of this went well for Warner Brothers, like it presumed so much about a great point. A DCU that was never going to happen. You know, contrast that with Marvel, which is, they plan ahead, but the MCU lives and dies by what's happening right here, right now. So if WandaVision just stunk and was terrible, the MCU might stop. Like, you know, there may be like a reset, but like, you know, and then Falcon and Winter Soldiers, so every brick is a stronger brick than came before, more or less.
That is a great point and is the entire problem with Batman v Superman. And I think we've mentioned this on prior episodes. I haven't looked them up, but I know you and I have talked, whether on the podcast or offline, about how when I had watched the extended cut or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
And me saying like, it kind of justifies the movie. Like the movie doesn't stink anymore, but there's still so many questions I have about why. But that's the whole problem, is that like Snyder made a cut of BVS with all of the stuff that foretold Justice League issues. And then they cut that to make the theatrical version. So it's like, well, now when Justice League comes out, it hasn't been properly set up. For example, I think it's exclusively in the extended edition of BVS so there's this like a military or police force that comes into the Kryptonian ship to arrest Mark Zuckerberg / Lex Luthor. When he gets arrested, he is standing in front of the computer telling him about Steppenwolf and the mother boxes. Yeah. So when the intro to Justice League, that same scene is shot in reverse, like you see part of it and then the camera sort of flips around and you see Zuckerberg's face. But that is like, Whedon cut both. Whedon didn't have that in his cut. So not only was it not, premised in BVS theatrical version, but then it's not even in the Whedon cut. So it's like, okay, well, I don't know that it matters that that Lex Zuckerberg was in on it, but it's like, Snyder was planting it there for a reason.
Well, you kind of need to know when Batman goes. Well, but you kind of need to know, because when Batman goes to visit Lex Luthor and there's a fake guy there, that's really confusing to people who didn't bother to go down that particular rabbit hole. And I get in some degree, in some ways you got to be a tiny bit forgiving, because you're like, look, this you have to assume, you have to rewind time back to 2017, like everything that's happened since didn't happen, and like this would have come out. I'm like, okay, fine, but then
that's exactly what I mean. Like, so if the theatrical version of BVS comes out and then Snyder's Justice League comes out, but you don't have that hint that Luthor knew about Steppenwolf's plan with the mother boxes, then you're like, well, then it makes less sense, Sorry, I interrupted.
No. Well, I'm just trying to play that out because like I'm a teeny bit forgiving, but at the same time, it's like you still didn't do enough. You didn't lay enough groundwork here, and then
right. Snyder's not doing that within the story. It's almost like the groundwork for him is separate scenes.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And then here's a better question. Does James Wan still do with Aquaman what he did if this version of if the Snyder Cut came out? Because
no,
you didn't get Volko in the original Whedon cut, but you did get Mira. And I had forgotten that Amber Heard, and maybe they reshot it, so maybe she doesn't do this, but like in Snyder Cut, she's like got a pseudo British accent, and her hair is all different, and vocals, and you could say, well, that's it changed between then and Aquaman. I'm like, yeah, but the aesthetic and then even the character and everything about Aquaman that James Wan did is so different from what we saw in the Whedon cut. So it's like, you can't assume this is a world where, unlike the MCU, like all these stylistic choices carried on. Like, they would have just... Right. You kind of get all these movies locked in amber, and you just kind of have to be really forgiving with how these all, is that the same Aquaman, or is this a splinter universe? Like,
you're leaving out the most obvious point, which is she has an English accent in the Snyder movies and not in the Aquaman movie. And that crazy red hair, like there's no way James Wan made that same movie if the Snyder Cut had come out, and that's why I think like a lot of this must've been studio direction, and Warner Brothers. If I had to guess, like, or I had to put money on it, I would say Warner Brothers told Whedon there's not going to be a JL2. So just like wrap this up and let's get it out the door.
God, can you imagine that? Like piss away all the money that they've been building up towards, and just like sacrifice this movie to the gods and we'll be done.
Right. And I got to follow up on that, but I want to put in another thing in your head in the Flash scene, which is, so I like the Iris scene, and to me, what it does is that it shows that Barry knew how to be a hero and get into dangerous situations and save people
But
demonstrably.
did it need to
like
be
it
so stretched out, though? Did we need to
maybe
listen
not.
to an entire licensed song while he does it? Like,
Right.
it's like,
That's a Snyder thing. Like I got a song for this, so the scene has to take the entire length of the song.
oh
But
my God.
it, to me, it's like that. Yes, it's longer, but it shows it doesn't tell. And in the Whedon cut, once he gets rid of that and he plays into the Flash being like such a new kid, Whedon has to add in that line that's like, just save one person, kid.
But
And
see, that
so-
line I missed, because that was a character moment, an honest moment between two characters who you haven't seen connect ever before
Interact,
in the
right,
theatrical.
or connect in that way.
And
yeah.
so,
well,
for Batman to
and I
basically
agree. I'm
be-
just saying, like, it doesn't work in the Snyder cut, like, because you've already seen him save someone.
Oh, I see
so
what you
he
mean.
doesn't
Yeah,
need,
yeah.
He doesn't
Okay.
need to say that to him because Flash is already a hero. And so I'm not arguing which is better. It's just, it's like, to me, it's like a personal preference thing. I don't, but it's one of those examples of like, once you pull the one thing out of the Snyder cut, this other thing isn't going to make sense. So you have to add something in, and it's, oh my
That's
God,
what I'm
it
saying.
just
That's what I'm saying.
becomes
There,
a thing.
between the two of them, there's a good movie, because I would much rather have lost the music video saving Iris scene, or saving this unnamed black woman scene, because we never know her name and she never comes back and she never says anything. I would rather have lost that for the Batman just save one person line, because that shows character dimension to Batman. It gives him sort of this kind of mentor, so much is packed into that one line that millions of dollars of CG and stunt filming could not accomplish. And like, whenever he's given that opportunity, like, Zack Snyder picks the more vapid, expensive option of the two. And I think that's one of the reasons, as much as I love his Watchmen movie, one of the things it does suffer from is that trade-off. And yeah, he hews to the Watchmen comic pretty closely, but there are things that he drops that he does so in favor of the big, visual kind of set piece that rings hollow at the end of it, versus like good moments. There's so much. I'm not saying we had to have the Russian family reinserted, but there was so much humor that Whedon had injected that I think was sorely lacking from what I saw in the 4-hour Snyder cut. Like, it just was, just one note, and just so like no one smiled or laughed. And when they did, it was just for a brief moment. I'm like, God, can we just get some?
Yeah, it's pretty
Ezra
humorous.
Miller, Ezra Miller is trying his best. It makes me almost feel like Zack Snyder, with all his addiction to slow motion and visual style, like he might have directed a really great Flash movie. Like, it almost seems like that's what he was interested in. Like, every time Barry Allen's on screen, he's the most charming one, and that could just be the way the character was played by Ezra Miller. But at the same time, it's like, anytime he did something with the Flash, I dug it. Like, I loved the way he kind of interpreted that.
Yeah.
It's almost like Robert Zemeckis needs to write a Flash movie that then Zack Snyder directs. Like, that might be the perfect combination.
Dude, and Flash, it was one of the, and so that's one of the things that, like, I think remains in the Whedon cut, is that every time you see Flash, you still want to see more Flash.
Yeah.
Like, it's Ezra Miller's portrayal, and it's what the character's doing and saying. You're just like, oh, I want more of this character. Cyborg, on the other hand, in the Whedon cut, I was like, what is this stupid two-dimensional character? Like, I don't care for him. I don't understand his powers. The Whedon cut could have been made without Cyborg, and it would have made just as much sense to me. Then the Snyder cut shows like how much was actually prepped and shot for Cyborg.
Yeah.
Like, Whedon could have gone back and just made, like, he could have taken all that Cyborg footage, presumably, added in his humorous lines for the others and made it like where Cyborg, I don't know. I guess that's a question.
Again,
would the Whedon cut have been improved by centering it on Cyborg rather than, the assembling a team plot?
No, because Cyborg, I'm sorry, but Ray Fisher plays that character very stale. Like, it's not, there's just not a lot going on. He's kind of boring whenever he's on unless it's him, sort of pre-Cyborg. So he plays, he's almost
exactly
the Cyborg we've seen in both the Justice League animated series and the Teen Titans animated series. Like, and even like the what's that show that was on DC Universe? This is on HBO Max now. The Cyborg's in it.
It's not just Titans, right? or is it?
No, but it's oh my god, it's one of those Grant Morrison series. Crap. What's
Crap. You think about that. But I'm just saying that the problem with Whedon is that he there's none of the personality of like Vic in that. So
yeah, exactly. Yeah. But in those shows, and I'm killing myself. I can't think of what the damn name is. It'll hit me soon. The Vic in those, he still has a, even the way he's designed, like he's not 95% cyborg with like a human head.
Right.
Like he's got more going on. So it's that struggle of man versus machine, and the man attitude, like his Vic attitude is still, and granted he grows as the thing goes on, but like this is just like it's like I hated the design, I hated the and just he plays it so one note. So when he pops up, like it's almost I had a joke with my wife. I was like, did Ray Fisher like edit this himself? Because it just seems like all the scenes where he pops back up are almost like so like in your face. It's like, well, then make him just, why isn't this just the Cyborg movie that leads into all this? It's kind of, it almost draws too much influence back, whereas the Whedon cut, to your point, doesn't show him enough. And there's like a happy medium somewhere in there.
No, that's only the point I wanted to make, is that like we realize in seeing this what a bad hand they dealt to the Cyborg character in the Whedon cut. It's just,
totally. He was right about that. Ray Fisher, when he complained, I mean, it's like, look, I was sidelined. No, you're
right.
correct.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Right. So here's one interesting thing I wanted to bring up in light of that too, is that the Whedon cut has disappeared seemingly.
It's still on HBO Max. I watched part of it.
You did?
Yeah.
I looked for it the other day and could not find it under any of the like Justice League stuff.
Huh.
And
pull up my iPad while you.
So in addition to that, and related to that, is there's definitely an argument for like how indulgent the Snyder Cut is, and I would not necessarily take sides in that. I'm kind of like, okay, well, if you're Zack Snyder and you're given a blank slate, maybe you put everything out on the table and say, let the fans judge. What I do think is super indulgent is this new cut that is in black and white called Justice.
Oh, I've heard about this.
It's out now. Yeah.
By the way, the Whedon cut is still on HBO Max as of this recording.
Okay. Sorry, then ignore what I said. When I looked for it the other day to just sort of compare and contrast and couldn't find it, I was like, oh, something is afoot. They have they've disappeared this cut.
What's interesting is that the Justice League promo graphic is in color. Zack Snyder's Justice League is in black and white. I don't know what the black and white version looks like. Like, is it just in the same thing as just a separate movie?
It looks exactly the same, but they put the title Justice is Gray on the thumbnail. Oh,
God. See?
That is like
who's that for?
Step too far. I don't know, because it's like it's already dark enough.
Does he think that like he's making Mank? Like what? This is not. Oh God, and this is where I side firmly on the people who just rag on Zack Snyder all the time. Like I'm sort of in the middle. Like I think there are people who are like there's like a cult of Snyder that is completely irrational, and then there are people who will just completely rag on every single thing he's ever done, no matter what it is. And I'm like, well, that's just as irrational. But anybody who's saying that we should let him, this is the movie as it truly should have been experienced. I'm like, it's not. They would have never put that in the theaters.
Exactly. That's true. And I don't know how anybody can reasonably make that argument.
If he wants to invite you to his house for a beer and go, hey, let me show you, I made it in black and white, and you want to go down to his basement and watch, then fine. Like that's completely fine. But anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
But I also think there's no way anyone can argue that this was the thing that would have come out in theaters, but for all all these other circumstances. There's no way. There was never going to be a 4-hour movie in a theater that was this. Also, there's no way that he had this like assembled to this state, or even like 90% of it, when the Whedon thing came out. Like, because there was this part of that early like release the Snyder Cut.
Do you know why I know that that's the case? Because a lot of the CGI in this was just terrible. It was like Mark Ruffalo in the Hulkbuster outfit, just terrible. Like, and one of my favorite sequences where this is obvious. So I loved all the Themyscira stuff in the Snyder Cut. Like, loved it compared to the Whedon cut. But when they're riding their horses in sort of their army. Oh, you can almost see the green screen curtain wrinkle. It's so bad. It's oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm interrupting you, and I'm sorry. The thing that we got to talk about in that green curtain theme is that. So I heard that maybe the only thing shot for this new was the epilogue with the Joker in it. What I have not heard any news on, and I'm dying to know what the truth of this scene is there's no way Batman showed up or Ben Affleck showed up for that Martian Manhunter epilogue. That thing is the worst CG of like Ben Affleck's face on someone else's body.
Oh, you don't think that was him?
No, it's like it looks like this like mashup of his face and Clooney's face.
It was a little uncanny. I didn't. Now that you mentioned
it,
it was,
and the eyebrows are all wrong. And
I was so tired by that point, though. Like this is at midnight by the time that came up that I was like, oh, okay. And then I think I was even half asleep, so I didn't pay as much attention. I'm gonna go back and watch that now.
I love that we both didn't, neither. It's not like both of us recognized that and wanted to talk about it because I mentioned that to my friend Brian, and he said when it happened, he was like, holy shit, that's CG. And his wife, who was watching it with him, was like, you are crazy. That's Ben Affleck. So like, but I think that just sort of speaks to like exactly what you're talking about, which was, they went in and they had to rush some things and they had to do it during, pandemic lockdown conditions. So I do want to, and this is a major problem that I presaged early in our podcast, is that like there's so many rabbit holes to fall down this, and because they've been so indulgent with it, I just want them to be even more indulgent. Tell us the whole story of the Whedon cut. Tell us the whole story of the reshoots for this. Like, tell us the whole story that what that epilogue means. Can we talk about that yet? Can we jump into epilogue?
So the two things, real quick before we talk epilogue, we haven't mentioned the 4:3 aspect ratio, and I just want to put out there, I hated it, and clearly, what I hated more than it was that stupid disclaimer that came up that's like, to respect
the director's vision.
And I'm like, no, to respect the fact that you only had budget for CG for 4:3 and not a full 16:9 ratio screen. That's why it's 4:3.
This is the thing I want to know.
There's no way he wanted that. There's no way.
Here's my supposition is that tons of the Snyder stuff, whether they had effects finished or not, was probably shot in IMAX. And so they had to change the rest of it to fit 4:3 for the IMAX screen.
Oh, I had not considered that at once. I think you're onto something.
Well, I was like, they went back to this the old footage, and they were like, well, shit, like a ton of the movie is in 4:3 because we were shooting it for IMAX. And to your point, I mean, I think your point is valid, is because they were like, well, we can't go cut that. Like that's the best and the most pixels we have in that scene. We can't reduce the resolution there. So I mean, this had to be a nightmare to cut together, no matter how it's put out.
Yeah,
but,
I just that.
But I totally agree. It was not the director's vision. That's BS.
That almost put a bad taste in my mouth to start with. I had to almost pause and go, just ignore it, keep going, because I'm like, this. Don't put that there. It's almost like it's like a middle finger before we even start.
Right.
Like, come on, man.
To play devil's advocate,
all right,
I will say, Chris Nolan did apparently tap Zack Snyder or like advocate for him with Warner Brothers to take over sort of the DC lead, like when the Dark Knight was ending. And Chris Nolan's been a producer on all of these movies. And I do remember in both Dark Knight movies seeing them in IMAX and seeing a note that was like, the director wishes to preserve the IMAX formatting for certain scenes, so you will notice this going from widescreen to full screen. And it was true. It was like when they would do a huge IMAX shot, because Chris Nolan had shot it in 70 millimeter IMAX, the screen would like sort of elongate and cover everything, and then it would go back to normal widescreen. I
know exactly what you're talking. That's especially noticeable in Rises. But like I think maybe it's just because Chris Nolan had bought a lot of goodwill with me up to that point, but that didn't bother me in the slightest. I'm like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. It's more like an explainer. It's like, look, it would just look weird to cut this, so you'll notice a change, but then we'll go back. Like if they had said that here, if they're like, look, we shot some of these scenes were originally shot. It would almost be cooler if they're like, some of these scenes were originally shot in IMAX to ensure that you're seeing what would have appeared in theaters. We're going to keep them in.
Totally agree with that. If I could have watched this thing filling up my screen, and then it like shrunk a little bit for a couple of scenes, I would have been much happier than watching it on a box. Like, honestly, that is the most disappointing thing of like the dumb way in which I acquired the original cuts of the original Star Wars trilogy. I finally found them on VHS, only to realize, like, to my dismay, that of course they were in 4:3 ratio because they're like 1980s VHS. Yeah. So it's like, not only, I finally get my hands on like an actual physical copy of the original cuts, and then I put it in I remember having to like travel with it to my parents' house to watch it or something because I didn't have a VCR, and putting it in their VCR and being like, son of a bitch. It's in 4:3.
Well, let's talk about the epilogue.
Yes.
And I, right out of the gate, I don't even think we should call it the epilogue, because it wasn't, in a narrative sense, it wasn't. It was just like, here's a collection of a bunch of post-credit sequences that we had to choose from, and we're just going to put them all in for you to enjoy. Here you go. And like, even it almost seems like some of these were scenes for, post-credit scenes for other movies that were going to come out, and they're like, here you go. And then just because he was, for some reason, he shot this whole new Joker sequence that, it's like, here's what I was gonna do. Here's where I was headed with this. That's right. What was your take? Like, I mean, we all knew it was coming. It wasn't going to be a surprise, but were you okay with it? Were you really off put by it? What was your reaction?
And you mean like specifically the Joker?
No, the whole epilogue, just the way it rolled, the fact that it was completely disconnected from it itself, as well as most of the other scenes.
I don't know how you do it. I'm not a smart enough I'm not a movie writer at all, and I'm not a clever enough writer to figure out like how you make it make sense. But I was very frustrated that there was no sense to it, because what I understood up to that point was, and talk about decoding a movie, was because there are scenes of Batman in that gear fighting the parademons in Batman v Superman, the extended cut. So what I didn't know what the hell was going on when I watched the BVS extended cut, but when I watched Justice League and saw a couple of the nightmares that, like, Batfleck wakes up from, I was like, okay, he's seeing like an alternate future. Then when Flash does the time traveling in the Great Climax, which by the way is a thing that like Whedon totally screwed up by not having, that time traveling, I felt like, okay, if this doesn't work, then we end up in that future, So that's where all these scenes kind of like make sense. But to have it happen afterwards, and there be this weird conversation between the Joker and Batman that's clearly hinting at something that's like, I think Snyder thinks he planted the clues for adequately. I just don't think he did. And so I've seen people interpret it as like that Batman may have had an affair with Lois, or not an affair, but he may have slept with Lois, maybe possibly after Clark was dead or something. Then, Darkseid uses the anti-life equation to bring Clark back to life, and Clark is like furious about this and goes hunting people, like joins Darkseid basically or something. And part of the clues for that is this pregnancy test called force majeure pregnancy test, act of God, in Lois's drawer.
Was it called force majeure on the brand? I missed that. Oh my God. I actually love that. That's kind of fun.
But to me, it's like, well, you don't, I did a quick poll, which was, do single women just keep pregnancy tests in their drawers all the time? And the 100% of the respondents said no. So, you only buy that thing when you're going to use it. And then once you use it, you throw it away. Like, you don't have extra ones in your drawer. So that, to me, that's like the Zack Snyder poor storytelling thing. It's like, dude, I get where you're going here, but that should have been in the trash can.
Yeah, but
not
even
in the
then, it's
bedside
like,
table.
why would you assume that was Bruce Wayne when Clark is dead maybe a week or two? And it's like, that could have just been Clark's kid. Like, why the...
Exactly.
In what
Or-
universe could anyone assume that
And-
oh, God. See, this
I
is
don't.
where it
So
just gets...
that I'm taking from a really great discussion on a podcast that is usually like hilarious and about bad movies called "How Did This Get Made?" They did Justice League this week with as a team up with another podcast called Blank Slate, and it's
Okay.
a really great discussion. And so it's it's like this is all myth now. I don't know what is true and what's the real story behind it. They're the ones who said the thing about Batman sleeping with Lois Lane. I had previously heard from another friend that we're supposed to understand that Lois is probably pregnant with Superman's baby.
Yeah,
And
that's what I would have assumed.
Right. But I don't know how that means. Like, so then there's the flashback or the Flash time travel that's in BVS where he comes back and says, "Oh no, I'm too early. Lois is the key. You were right about him." And you're like, what?
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it. So that's my short take on the epilogue, or my long take on the epilogue, which is like there are all these like disparate clues or something planted, and there's no clear understanding of it. And I think that's poor storytelling. It's like it's not clever. In other words, it's not clever to just like throw a bunch of ideas out there and say, you make it up. What makes sense to you?
My biggest problem with the epilogue, other than, even apart from its incoherence, is the fact that if you're to tell me that what the whole point of this exercise was you're going to see what would have come out in 2017. All right, then don't add anything new. Don't create some weird thing that's like, well, I'm going to give you a taste of what I was also going to do. And it's like, no. If this wasn't going to appear as the end credit scene in 2017, it shouldn't be in this. And like, even that Martian Manhunter scene at the end, I'm guessing was not ever filmed for 2017.
No.
And it's like, it's one more thing. I'm like, this would have been cool to have in the movie. Why are you showing us this now? Like this, why couldn't he have just joined the league too? Like this seems like...
If you told me that Zack Snyder just hired someone to film Zack Snyder walking outside of that house and then they CGI'd Ben Affleck's face on it, I would believe it completely.
I wouldn't be surprised by that. I've got it pulled up to the side, by the way, just to check it. Yeah, it's uncanny. It's weird.
I did like the Martian Manhunter reveal after the Lois and Martha talk, and whether that was shot for the 2017 cut or shot for this movie, I think I heard, and it might have been on How Did This Get Made, that was shot for this cut. But Snyder did it using that character that maybe he intended to be revealed as Martian Manhunter. The character that had been in like
the General
Man of Steel and stuff.
Yeah. Which, by the way, you never even see, like, you hear the voice, but there's never a shot where like he's morphing into John Jones. Like, so then even that's ridiculous, because then you're like, even if you were paying attention, you're like, wait, I recognize that. Is that the General? They're not even going to show the guy's real face. And then the funniest thing of all, like this, it was almost like the turd on top of the sundae, this whole, that particular scene, because it probably wasn't Ben Affleck. At no time, like it's the least, it's the least Bruce Wayne Batman thing ever. He comes kind of meandering out like he's been on a drunk bender all night, and this guy's standing there, and it's like almost like Ted S. Preston. He's just like, yo, what are you doing here? And then basically John Jones gives his spiel. Never once does Bruce Wayne go, who are you? What's your name? Like, why are you here? He literally goes, cool, okay. And like he's about to turn around, and John Jones
he does
has
say
to
that
say,
thing of like, I've been called
but John
many
Jones
names.
himself has to go, so in case you want to know who I am, I'm the Martian. It's like, dude, Batman would have either already known and like called him out on it, or at least be like, tell me everything because I'm a freaking detective. It was such a just weird out of character moment for everybody. And at the same time, I'm like, if you're going to be this, if you want to have Martian Manhunter in this, put him in your movie. Like,
well, and what I was referring to was like the reveal of when Martha leaves Lois and then transforms into, Martian Manhunter and the General. That's where I thought was like cool. I was like, that's...
Wait, hold on. What are you referencing? Because that scene doesn't exist. Oh my God,
did you fall asleep? Yeah, it's in the Snyder Cut. So Lois has this whole conversation with Martha Kent, and Martha says, you need to rejoin the living. And then Martha Kent walks outside Lois Lane's apartment, and her eyes glow red, and she becomes the Martian Manhunter.
What
and
are
then
you talking about? Where
this
is this?
Cut in the Snyder Cut.
But this isn't in the epilogue, is it?
I don't know what to tell you. This is an amazing reveal. You may have
I'm
fallen
literally
asleep
I'm
for this.
fording through the epilogue now, and I do not see this scene.
It's not in the epilogue. No, it's in like chapter 3.
Oh my god!
Because
well, then I'm gonna have to go back
Lois,
to that.
Yeah, because Lois sets up. I wouldn't be surprised if it's the very end of chapter 3,
Okay.
2, because Lois has previously
Maybe I was
been
in the
going to the
bathroom.
Superman memorial over and over, and this is her break. Like this happens right before she goes, and Superman comes back to life, because the next time she goes and the cop says, I didn't think you were going to make it this morning, and she says one last time to the cop.
Yeah, I remember that.
So that happens. It happens right before that, because Martha has encouraged her to go join the land of the living, and then it's revealed that Martha was just John shapeshifting. So
Interesting.
if you somehow
I missed that. I
step
must
away
have
to
been in the
refresh your
bathroom.
beverage or something, yeah, then
Wow.
the Martian Manhunter at the end doesn't make any effing sense. But even in that moment, it's like 10 seconds, if that. And that's one of the things I heard they reshot, was that they came back and did the scene outside. I think that's what I heard, was that it was reshot.
Oh,
but
Lord.
And I also so I thought that scene was very cool. And I thought tons of scenes were cool with the Snyder thing, with the Snyder Cut. Jeez, I'm losing it now. But I just wanted to highlight one other thing I thought was really, really cool visually, was when Diana goes out to meet Cyborg, and the lights go down in that block of town, and then you see what looks like a jet airplane flying at the ground, and it so seamlessly turns into Cyborg. That looked so cool to me.
Yeah,
And
that was cool.
I just
That was cool.
really love that, and it felt like much cooler than Whedon's version of Cyborg's powers, I guess.
Yeah. Again,
anyway,
there's look, here's my final take on Snyder Cut. It is beautiful looking nonsense. It's 4 hours of amazing looking, just utter nonsense. And if some of the coolest cinematic sort of moments that you'll have with certain characters, but there's no reason to watch it sequentially or ever again in one chunk. But at the same time, I agree. Refresh my same point. I'm convinced that you could take the Whedon cut and this, and somewhere in there is a tight, maybe 2 hour and 20-minute movie that functions really well. And it harnesses the best, because Whedon, for better or for worse, did bring a lot of interesting stuff into this. Like I'm even remembering just a lot, like the fact that he kept Superman in the Superman suit. It wasn't the black and white suit. At the same time, we didn't need the weird mustache removal cell phone video at the beginning of the Whedon cut. So there's
Right.
things that, but I ended up liking these characters a lot more in the Whedon cut. With the exception of Cyborg, they breathed. They were more moments where you're like, okay. Whereas in this, just felt like these characters are and just so many slow motion posing. Just a lot of people posing, and just zooms in and slow mo and more slow mo, and it's like, oh Christ, just give me somebody laughing with somebody else, something.
And I take your point, and I like it. I appreciate it. But to me, that example of the Superman suit is like a perfect encapsulation of why Whedon didn't get it and felt like he had to stamp it as an Avengers movie. A time was when I would have said Whedon doing DC is like J.J. Abrams doing Star Trek or Star Wars, vice versa. I don't know, because I feel like they both should have just stayed in whatever one of the universes, and instead they tried to mix them and turn both universes into the same vision. And after that last J.J. Abrams Star Wars, I don't think he was right about it. But to me, the playing into the Superman, I can't remember if it's called Superman Reborn or Death of Superman, but that was what Snyder was referencing, was the black suit was canon to that storyline. And it, having Whedon cutting the whole thing out, I don't know, you can, take it or leave it, but it just, I got where Snyder was going with that. And I kind of feel like that's one of those details where Whedon might've been better off putting him in the black suit. That's why he but it's another thing where it's it's kind of like the Flash story. In order to put him in the black suit, I think you have to have him walking through the Kryptonian ship, and looking at his other suits and then choosing the black one, like
Yeah. Oh,
you have to kind of
yeah.
set it up. And if you're going to cut that setup for time, then I don't know, maybe you cut the whole suit. It's like the mystery of how this all got made and like all
we're
the
gonna hear
myriad choices.
There's no
It's
way
crazy.
Joss Whedon lets this be the final word. Like he will.
There's no way
absolutely
Snyder
have a
does
response.
either. Yeah. Exactly. These are two directors that want to tell you what's going on. But I wanted to wrap up with this, which is, do you think this makes Warner Brothers look dumb?
The fact
Or does
that
it make them look real savvy?
I mean, it's savvy only in that. I mean, like the only way we'll know is if we could find out how many new HBO Max subscribers there are, for this, 2 weeks prior and 2 weeks after the release of this, and if that number spikes back down again, or if it stays up. We probably will never know that. If we did know that, then it's like, well, then they're savvy because they made a splash on HBO Max when they sorely needed one.
Yeah.
I don't think this is the way to do it. I mean, had this not happened, they wouldn't have anything. So if, this was a move of desperation, I think. Also, like don't be fooled. This was not the result of some intense fan campain. This was Warner Brothers going, we can't make any movies because of COVID, but we can do effects on movies. Do we have anything where we could do some effects? Anybody? I don't know. All our movies are either done and need to go out to the theater, or they're too soon. We don't. Zack Snyder had that thing lying around, didn't he? Let's call it that. And then, because I think even Deborah Snyder's wife was really pushing them to be like, look, you can put all these people to work if you just make my husband's movie. And they did. So, but at the same time.
I think I think that was all great. I think that's like to me that does look savvy. Like let's make a new thing out of let's make a remix of a thing that's going to draw new viewers. I do know that this was in discussion as an exclusive release to HBO back in 2019.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a weird wrinkle, but but that like it was 2020 that they had to, Snyder had to sit down and work on it. That's amazing. To answer my own question, you had such a great point, which is there's no way this 4-hour cut ever comes out in a theater. So it's impossible to argue like Warner Brothers looks to me it just feels like disingenuous to say Warner Brothers looks dumb because the Snyder cut is better than the Whedon cut, because we know this Snyder cut would never have existed in a theater, and if it had, it would have bombed worse. I think
so.
Because nobody wants to see a 4-hour movie.
Well, no one wants to see a 4-hour movie, and let's say he found a way to cut it down. I think it would have done exactly the same business, if not a little worse than Whedon, because at that point, remember, Batman v Superman did not do well. Like, it may have made money overseas and stuff, but like that basically broke the Whedonverse as we know it. Like that, I think at that point, the Snyderverse. Warner Brothers was like, oh man. So when Zack Snyder's, when the tragedy with his daughter happened and he had to leave the set, I think Warner Brothers was more than happy to be like, okay, thanks. And then just, trying to rush because they're like, shit, if this is just BVS times 4 hours or, whatever it's going to be, like, ugh. And
that's why I think that it came from the studio to, like, they told Whedon, like, wrap it up. There's not going to be another Justice League in this universe.
The other big glaring thing that we've only hinted on is that by that point, by 2017, the Wonder Woman movie had come out, right? Already at that point?
Yeah.
Yeah. Aquaman hadn't yet, but was in development. Right. So you had these, and then Shazam was on the way, and Shazam is very tonally different, obviously. So you had this situation where, like, if the Snyder Cut had come out, and even if it had come out like at 2 to 3 hours, right? It would have existed in a world where these characters were already moving on in different ways. They were already they were already on a different course in terms of and it would have become ever more obvious that the Snyder universe is like a different universe. It just doesn't exist. So then Whedon's attempt tried to finesse that a little bit more. So I think if the Snyder Cut doesn't ever exist, then at least Whedon's movie kind of keeps a little bit of cohesion, for a little longer. But the second that Robert Pattinson Batman movie comes out, then that breaks it anyway. So I don't know. It's just, I think Warner Brothers they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. And it proves, I think there's a little savvy and a little bit of nonsense to your earlier question, but I think it proves more than anything else, there is not a Kevin Feige over there. There's not a creative steward at a high level for all their DC stuff. And if there's not gonna be, then don't make any collaborative movies at all. Make them all one-offs, that's fine.
Well, I love that you wrapped up on that, and I totally agree. Like, it is fine not to have Feige or Kathleen Kennedy and to say, we just make character movies, and they feel different. Like, that Shazam movie is such a winner,
Yeah.
And both Wonder Woman movies are among my favorite superhero movies ever. And and what I keep pondering is this thing that I've brought this up in other podcasts where we've talked about comics, which was this thing I read from a comics creator years and years ago, where he said, Marvel is a fan's paradise because everything is connected. And so you can dig in and it's all in continuity. And DC is a storyteller's paradise because you come in to play with these iconic characters. And DC is much more willing to do, these crazy Elseworlds and one-shots and things like that. Whereas Marvel's constantly trying to keep everything in the continuity. And I think Warner Brothers DC needs to just lean into that. And there's 17 different Batmans. It's fine.
Yeah.
Whereas if someone else becomes Iron Man as Tony Stark, in the next 10 years, there's going to be uproar.
Well, unless it's like a different character as Iron Man. But yeah.
Right. That's exactly it can't be Tony, but it's played by, Ryan Reynolds.
I mean, the fact that they're already saying, look, Black Panther will continue and T'Challa will just die in the universe. It's like, Jesus. All right. Like that. They weren't even willing to recast, but an actor who died and a perfectly acceptable, it's like when Richard Harris died and they had to find a new Dumbledore. Like, everybody's like, look, some people, they're never going to love anybody more than Richard Harris, but we got to move forward. We got to, you're just going to have to deal with a different Dumbledore. And it's like this, it would have been easy enough for them to cast Denzel Washington's kid. I always forget his name. Shoot. Anyway, he would have been an interesting T'Challa. So they're like, no, we're not going to even do that. It's like, if the actor and the character are synonymous. So I'm guessing if Sam Jackson had ever kicked the bucket in the last 3 years, then Nick Fury would just be dead. There would not be a new Nick Fury. So I think contractually there cannot be. I think once he took the job, I know this is true. When he took the job, he mandated, he's like, look, the second I'm cast in the comics and in the cartoons, he has to look like me. Like, there will not be another look, like all Nick Fury from this point on will look like me, or I will voice them if I'm available. And so he wrote that into the contract. So all of a sudden, Nick Fury started looking like Samuel L. Jackson across the board. And I'm like, that's pretty savvy, because then you think of Nick Fury, you think of him. It's like, it's all the same.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think we've covered it. I think we've said enough.
Oh my God. Yeah.
If you're still listening, God bless you.
And just pat yourself on the back that, this was only a quarter of the time you would have spent watching Zack Snyder's Justice League. That's
true. Yeah. So you got, if you're on the fence, now and now you don't have to watch. You can go through all the Dark Side stuff and just watch that, because that's beautiful. And that's pretty much all. And then you can watch the epilogue and just sort of cry. Anyway, if you want to know more about these kinds of things and you want to hear more episodes like this, go back to our archive. You can find all that at panelism.ink. That's panelism.inc. Also on Instagram, same handle, panelism.inc. And we'll be back soon with another episode. We have a few in
Talking
the cans.
Comics.
Yeah, Talking Comics. But it's been fun to kind of do a classic Todd and Taylor style episode. It's been a while since we've done it. So
what would have happened is if we had planned a comics episode, we would have talked about Justice League for 45 minutes before we even got to the comics.
Yep.
So this was the only way we could handle it. Or you and I would have talked for 2 hours and then hit record on the comics episode. So
that's true.
Even today, you were like, don't even get into it. Let me hit record first.
Yeah. Just in case. You never know. Well, anyway, it's been fun. We'll catch you all next time. And
we will see you then, or we will see you at another time.
That's right.